Hello there. So this is going to be our final installment of our Hellenistic philosophers. And as you can see, we're going to be doing skepticism here. So there are two types of skepticism in the Hellenistic period. The first type, which we're not going to go into too much, is called academic skepticism. This is called such because it comes from Plato's Academy. After Plato's death, Arcesilaus, A-R-C, well, really it's a kappa in the Greek, E-S-I-L-A-U-S, Arcesilaus, or Arcesilaus, depending on how you want to go with that, but that sounds kind of weird. At any rate, he was Plato's successor and his cousin, because of course nepotism. Instead of Aristotle taking over, Arcesilaus does. All right. He made the Academy a school for skepticism. And frankly, I think it went that way for like the next, I don't know, probably 800 years or something like that crazy. But academic skeptics took Socrates as their founder, much like the Stoics and much like the Cynics and, other people and such. So, out of all these Hellenistic philosophies, 3 out of 4 of them, at least part of 3 out of 4 of them, claim Socrates as their founder. So again, the problem with Socrates always comes up here as whether or not he's the Socrates of Plato, the Socrates of Arcesilaus, the Socrates of Zeno from the Stoics, or Antisthenes of the Cynics. But at any rate, they all share some things in common. Of course, Socrates, and this one particularly, these skeptics clung to the one claim that up to knowledge that Socrates makes. He makes one and only one claim to knowledge. All I know is that I know nothing. So this is, in fact, a positive claim to knowledge. You know exactly one thing, that you know nothing. Everything else is unclear or relative or uncertain, not entirely evident, or perspicuous, or whatever you want to call it. Okay. The second type, which we will be spending more time on, actually most of this video on, is Pyrrhonianism. So Pyrrhonian skepticism, sometimes just referred to as Pyrrhonianism, or the Pyrrhonian type of skepticism, was founded by Pyrrho, or Pyrrho. Depends how you want to pronounce it. P-Y-R-R-H-O, from 360 to 270 BCE. And he was a soldier in Alexander the Great's army. He traveled around the quote unquote known world. Again, this is very Western centric. That's not the whole world, obviously. It's not really, it's known to other people what the world is like, other than, Western Europe. But at any rate, so maybe closer to Eastern these days. But at any rate, after traveling everywhere and seeing lots and lots of different religions and philosophies and customs and practices and different sorts of beliefs in truth, after traveling the known world and having seen and heard and read a lot of stuff and searching for the truth is out there, in the known world, he came to the conclusion that he didn't believe in anything, because you could go someplace else and they believe something totally different and have to be just about as justified. So he believed that nothing was real. Now, the apocryphal death of Pyrrho, or the story that they tell of how he died, and as I said before, a lot of these philosophers have very weird deaths due to us just trying to remember something about them. Remember Thales, he died by falling into a well while staring at the night sky, as he predicted the solar eclipse and he believed everything was water. Or let's see here, Pythagoras, got caught between a river and a field of beans and wasn't supposed to cross either of those and got killed by a mob. Then there was, of course, Pyrrho, which is who we're talking about now, and they claim that his followers used to have to push him out of the way from getting hit by street carts and things like that. And apparently he died by getting hit by a street cart because he said he didn't believe that it existed. Now, I believe that that's not true. And technically speaking, if you really want to get down to it, Nietzsche was correct when he claimed that Pyrrho, whatever you want to call him, actually wasn't even really a skeptic. He was a nihilist. That being that you don't believe in anything and that nothing matters. A nihilist. Now, we will be talking about that much later in the class when we get to Nietzsche. And by the way, Nietzsche's not a nihilist. He's just very concerned with it. So I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to write some more stuff up here on the board, particularly about the most famous of all skeptics, Sextus Empiricus. All right. Well, actually, hold on. Let's tell you about a couple of other famous guys that you don't necessarily have to know. Timanflus, Phlius, from 360 to 230 BCE. He was Pyrrho's pupil, and he wrote on social problems, and he wrote poems as well about philosophers that were kind of funny too. He made jokey poems about them and why their philosophies were flawed, using skepticism as a tool. Then there's Carneades. He's actually one of my favorites, from 214 to 129 BCE. He's an academic skeptic, so from Arcesilaus' school, where they don't believe in anything at all, except for that all they know is they can know nothing. They believe in actually one thing. Pyrrhonians, they haven't found any truth yet. These guys claim this is the only truth. So Carneades refutes he refutes Stoicism and Epicureanism with skepticism, showing why they're flawed. This is some pretty fun stuff to read after having looked at all the Stoics and skeptics. He's going to call them dogmatists as well. So is other people such as Pyrrho. And not Pyrrho, but sorry, that's way earlier, but rather Sextus Empiricus, who we'll talk about in a minute. Then he's sent to Rome in 155 BCE, and he goes to the Senate. And before the Roman Senate, he argues on the first day of all the reasons why justice is good and why justice is right. And then he comes back the next day and argues exactly the opposite argument with almost the exact same level of rigor and convincingness. So the deal is he's just trying to show that you can't know either of these things to be true. So all you can know is you know nothing. But I think it's fun to show someone who used philosophy to go to the Senate and just say one thing exactly one way and then another thing the exact other way. It's kind of like debating or whatever. All right. So now we're going to pause, and we're going to then come back here and talk about Sextus Empiricus and the outlines for Pyrrhonian skepticism. Okay, starting back again here, we have the most famous of all of the skeptics, aside from perhaps Pyrrho, the first skeptic, Sextus Empiricus. Now, he wrote somewhere around the 2nd century CE or Common Era or AD or whatever you want to call it. We don't know very much about him. We don't even have his exact dates. He was probably a medical doctor based on his name. Sextus Empiricus means something like exact science or something along those lines of medicine or whatnot. It's hard to say. But again, we do know that he wrote outlines of Pyrrhonian skepticism or outlines of skepticism, depends how you want to put it, or outlines of Pyrrhonianism. The translation can be a couple of different ways. All right. So when we go through this, there's pages 3 through 13 out of this book. It's just an excerpt, but it's the first couple of pages of book 1 of this, and it's really good, and it's pretty well written here too. So this is on page 3, the beginning. We'll start at the beginning. The most fundamental difference among philosophies. When people are investigating any subject, the likely result is either discovery, right here, or else denial of discovery and a confession of inapprehensibility, or else a continuation of the investigation. That investigating word there is zetetic or zateos, which means to search, to investigate, to seek, something along those lines. So investigation. Those who are called dogmatists in the proper sense of the word think they have discovered truth. For example, the schools of Aristotle, Epicurus, and the Stoics, and some others. So, for instance, Aristotle said there are the four causes. Aristotle said the soul is like this. Aristotle said, this is how things are. Unlike Plato's Socrates, who says, "Oh, what do you think it is? Oh, what do you say it is? Oh, is it like this or is it like that?" No, Aristotle just comes out and says, "This is how it is," right? So that's much like the Stoics say, no, this is how it is. It's just a matter of, accepting proper judgments or whatever to be happy. And, all is God and all that stuff. That's claim to truth, absolute truth, dogmatic truth. Or in the case of the Epicureans, things like when you die, it's done, or, what the heck else, all pleasure, all happiness comes from pleasure and all sorrow comes from pain, etc. These are things that they take to be dogmatic truths. Now, what does the word dogmatic mean? Because that might sound like a bad word to you, or you might have heard it used in religion or even the movie Dogma. It's kind of old, it's a Kevin Smith movie, but at any rate, these guys also, like everybody else, trying to be happy. Their happiness is ataraxia again, much like the Stoics, tranquility, equanimity, a calmness of soul, undisturbedness, this sort of thing. But they get to it through a very different route than the Stoics do. They do this through a manner of questioning or investigating. All right, so this is how they're going to do it. But let's go back to dogmatic. So a dogmatic belief is any belief that you find unquestionable. So for instance, if you are some sort of theist and you believe in God of any sort or gods of any sort, you believe that, generally speaking, dogmatically. That means that nothing could be said or done or otherwise be the case than that, and nothing could convince you otherwise. You dogmatically follow the faith that you follow, or you dogmatically believe in God at least, or something along those lines. Much like atheists are dogmatic about not believing in God. So they're dogmatists too, of a different sort. They just absolutely find it unshakable, unquestionably the case that there is no such thing as God, and thus that is their dogmatic belief, right? Other dogmatic beliefs usually are like for or against abortion, or that killing children is wrong, or killing babies is wrong, or murder is wrong, dogmatically speaking, or something like that. There's all sorts of stuff. Property might be dogmatically wrong, or other stuff. I mean, it just depends. It's just anything you believe unquestionably and that you believe to be the truth with a big T, capital truth. Okay. So most philosophies, most religions, even most politicians. Then we move on to confession of inapprehensibility, and they claim that this is the academic version. So the conclusion is that of Socrates, that you can't know this. The only thing that I can know is that I know nothing. And thus, here the inapprehensible comes up, and we just say, nope, nobody can ever figure it out. That's just the end. That's how it is. That's the nature of reality. All you can know is that you don't know anything. And then we come to the Pyrrhonian skeptics, the variety that Sextus Empiricus is up to here. And we'll go on with this. So the schools of Clytomachus and Carneades and the other academics have asserted that things cannot be apprehended. And the skeptics, and here he means the Pyrrhonian skeptics, are still investigating, still zateos. Hence, still searching, still seeking the truth. And they do mean this legitimately. This isn't like, haha, we haven't found any truth yet. We're just pretending like we're seeking. No, they're really looking for the truth, and there's reasons for that. And we'll talk about it as we go along here. Hence, the most fundamental kinds of philosophy are reasonably three: dogmatic, academic, and skeptic. The former two it will be appropriate for the others to describe, so he's not going to talk about them. In the present work, we shall discuss in outline the skeptical persuasion. By way of preface, let us say that on none of the matters to be discussed do we affirm that anything certainly are just as they say they are. Rather, we report descriptively on each according to how they appear to us at the time. Now, they're not going to claim that we can't understand or know appearances. And this is partly why I believe that really Pyrrho didn't get hit by a streetcar, because he didn't believe in it. You should trust, well, you should, believe in appearances, but how something actually is, how something in truth is not necessarily a given here. Okay, and any arguments that they're going to use, he's only going to use as a propedeutic or a purgative, which is to say a ladder to climb and then to kick out once you get to the top, or some ipecac to imbibe so that you can vomit out the bad stuff. They're not along with the ipecac, So again, the idea here is that they'll provide counterpoints, but those counterpoints they don't have to believe in. They're just providing counterpoints for the sake of providing counterpoints to your argument. Very Platonic or Socratic in a certain sense. All right. So let's carry on here. This is still on page 3 at the very bottom, second section. The accounts constitutive of skepticism. The skeptical philosophy contains both general and specific account. The general account we set out as distinctive character of skepticism, saying that the concept of it, what are its principles, what are its arguments, and what is its standard that we aim? What are the modes of suspension of judgment? How do we understand skeptical assertions, and what distinguishes skepticism from its neighboring philosophies? So then he's going to give the specific account. So the nomenclature of skepticism, this is section 3, page 4. The skeptical persuasion then is also called zetetic or investigative, from or seeking or searching, from its activity in investigating and inquiring. Suspension, from the feeling that comes about after the inquirer investigates, aphoretic, either, as some say, from the fact that one puzzles over it, apisen. In fact, again, remember, aporia means either a suspension of judgment, a perplexity, a stop in the road, lack of provisions, or just a stopping point from which you cannot carry on further. So again, Plato's dialogues, a lot of them are aphoretic, which means that, much like the Euthyphro, we get to the end and we have not actually come to a conclusion on what piety is. We've just come to a number of different things as to what piety is. Definitely not. But aporia is the stopping point, the perplexity, the puzzling over, and investigates everything else from its being at a loss whether to assert or deny. In Pyrrhonism, the fact that Pyrrho appears to us to have attached himself to skepticism more systematically and conspicuously, obviously, than anyone before him. So what is skepticism? Skepticism is, this is section 4, page 4. Sorry about that. Skepticism is an ability to set out oppositions among things which appear and are thought of in any way at all. So any claim, appearance, or thought, all right? An ability, because of equipollence, in the opposed objects we account, we come first to the suspension of judgment, and then afterwards, tranquility. All right. So we call it an ability, not in the fancy sense, but in the simple sense of to be able to. Things which appear we take in the present context of objects of perception, which is why we contrast them with objects of thought. In any way at all can be taken as an ability to show that we are to understand the word ability in its straightforward sense, as we said, or else to set up opposition among things of which appear and are thought. Okay, now let's skip down a bit here. The section 10 of, subsection 10 of 4 on page 5. By opposed accounts, we do not necessarily have in mind the affirmation or negation. Okay, so this doesn't have to absolutely prove one way or the other, or affirm or negate it 100%, but take the phrase simply in the sense of conflicting accounts. Okay, by equipollence, we mean equality with regard to being convincing or unconvincing. So it doesn't have to be completely 100% there. It doesn't have to be indubitable. It doesn't even have to be beyond a reasonable doubt. It just has to be reasonably convincing. And the word convincing here in the ancient Greek is pistis, depending on how you want to pronounce that, P-I-S-T-U-S. And that just means evidence or convincingness or persuasiveness. And the idea is that you're going to be somewhat persuasive with your argument so as to provide equipollence And equipollence is just a fancy word for having a reasonable counter argument such that then you have to come to aporia, a block in the road, a place you can't go any further, and suspend judgment, right? This aporia is a suspension of judgment, all right? So finally, just more convincing, suspension of judgment is a standstill of the intellect owing to which we neither reject nor posit anything. So the equipollence is just there. This is really just here to be sort of like, well, if you think it's this way, well, how about this way? Is this at least reasonably convincing that this could also be the answer? Possibly. This is problematic for the sciences pretty frequently because there's lots of, I mean, because like you can say, yeah, standard model theory, but then there's also a possibility it's reasonable to claim, at least in some sense, that there's string theory, which goes completely against it in a lot of ways. So the deal is that, I could make that argument. Even the creationists have a reasonable argument for a counterpoint here. I won't get into it just now, but if there's, well, I will, I guess. If you want to talk about the Grand Canyon, we could say that there's a second atmosphere that flooded down, and with that amount of, for the Great Deluge in the Bible, or the Great Flood, and with Noah and the Ark and all that, and if there was that much water pressure and flowage, it could have carved out the Grand Canyon reasonably or something like that, and produced a lot of different layers. Also, notably, when we talk about science and climate and all sorts of other stuff, we've really only been accurately tracking this stuff with instruments for like the last maybe 200 years or so, 3 max on some of these things. But the deal is that without modern ways of measuring things, how long do we know that this actually takes? We've only seen it evolve or been taking accurate measurements on these things for a little while. I mean, also we can throw out carbon dating, because carbon dating is sometimes inaccurate, and as science says, if things are inaccurate, then that means that they're maybe not the case. So if we throw out carbon dating, add in the flood and some other stuff, we can make it seem like the world might be 13,000 years old or something stupid like that. If you believe this, I mean, Hume is actually going to be your best friend when we get to him later in the semester, pretty soon after this midterm, because it's going to claim we can't have proper causality show up. So thus, we can only do what the creationists call observational science, which means science that we've observed so far or thus far, because we have no reason to believe that it necessarily has always been the same, because it's not necessarily the case 100% that the rules haven't changed over time, because the rules that we quote unquote discover, we kind of make up in some respects. We've been talking about that in class with science and such. At any rate, that's not a great argument, but we can go with other stuff. I mean, there is God, there is no God. We can argue about that. The sky is blue except for at night, except for at the sunrise and the sunset, except for that it's not actually blue because that's not the sky. That's just the sun's refraction across the atmosphere at a particular angle or whatever, or something like that. Is the grass green? Well, the grass is green to us because our eyes have particular conic, we're triconic or tetraconic vision of a certain variety. Other animals see the grass as a different color than what we would say green is, or maybe not. It doesn't, we wouldn't ever be able to know how an animal sees it. I don't know how a bat sees the grass, or how a cricket or a bird sees the grass, what color they see it as, because I'm not a bat or a bird or a cricket, and I could never figure out what they would think it is or see it as. And inherently, it's not any type of color, because if you break it down to its smallest parts, atoms don't have colors at all, although that's technically a fallacy, but still, given the right lighting, given different sightedness, like some people are colorblind or are red green colorblind, particularly in males, and some females have tetraconic instead of triconic vision, which means they see a boatload more colors than everybody else. But it's very hard to test for, because how do you test for something that's, oh, you I see this different shade of green than you, but you can't see it. So how do I differentiate this? This only happens in females, and up until very recently, you couldn't even get tested for this until you died, because they'd have to cut open your actual eyeball to see about the cones in your eye. That's how they discovered this in the first place. That some females had more cones than males, or different ones. At any rate, still very interesting stuff. That some of us actually see more colors. Some women see more colors than men, oddly enough. At any rate, so we get equivalence, then we get some suspension of judgment. So is it really green? No. Or is baby killing always wrong? Okay, let's go with baby killing. And we're not talking about abortion right now. I'm not even going to bother with that. But when we say baby killing, let's say actual babies that are born. Born things in the United States count as things that have taken breath and are now out of the womb. So that's why abortions have to happen in uterus. Okay, carrying on. Otherwise, they're technically counted as humans as soon as they have been birthed and taken breath. Now, carrying on, actual babies. So let's start off with the easy example. What about if you went back in time and you killed Hitler's baby? It's like, okay, that's maybe whatever. There's probably going to be another Hitler or something like that. But you might still find that questionable. Not because Nazis aren't bad, but because it might screw the timeline or something like that. But at any rate, the other thing, and this is actually real, is maybe something like babies born with Tay-Sachs disease. It's a genetic disease you can test for in utero, technically. It's mostly Eastern Europeans, some Cajuns, and standardly speaking, particularly the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe. And this is partially because they're very serious about making sure that they only marry within their same community. So their genetic pool is, let's say, a little less diverse than others. I'm not talking about ancestry, inbreeding exactly here, but what I am talking about is that the gene pool is not spread out. And I mean, that's basically the whole point and purpose of sexual reproduction. Otherwise, we'd all just be asexual reproducers, but sexual reproduction, its major benefit is the ability to diversify your gene sort of portfolio, so that if something like Tay-Sachs disease shows up in your gene pool, by breeding with other people that don't have this, it'll cut down on the possibility. Another one of these that's similar is like sickle cell anemia. The reason that if you have two people that have it, that have a child, it's likely that they'll get sickle cell anemia. But if you only have half of it, you don't get half of the genetic code for it. You don't get sickle cell anemia, but you do get greater resistance to malaria, which is why those people survived in some situations and others did not, because malaria is the second largest killer of children in the world, right after dehydration due to diarrhea, and that's usually due to poor drinking water. But Tay-Sachs disease is a degenerative disease where no child or baby or whatever has ever lived past the point of 5 years old. They never have proper neurological development, but they do get proper nervous system development. So they're in great pain all the time. They cry. They are in horrific, agonizing pain for the entirety of their very short life. They'll never fully develop the brain. They'll never fully develop the body entirely. It's just a really, really horrible thing to look at and watch. And some people do actually test in utero for this genetic marker and selectively abort if the child was going to be born with Tay-Sachs disease, to avoid said fetus coming out as a child that would then have to suffer for the entirety of its life, never really come to full consciousness, and then die after probably causing a lot of woe, pain, and suffering to the family, and also cost a lot of money in healthcare. Now, the money part I don't care nearly as much about, and I'm sure people don't either, but there is at least a question as to whether or not it's ethical to euthanize a baby that has Tay-Sachs disease if you didn't test in utero, because there is some dangers to testing in utero for this sort of stuff. You can injure the fetus with that kind of blood testing and such like this. So a lot of people don't like doing that for that sake. And also some people don't care. They just say that, especially amongst the Jewish community, that God has given them this child, and therefore this is what they're allotted in life, or something along that line. But I can say that I feel like it's at least a reasonable counterpoint to say that a child or baby with Tay-Sachs disease could reasonably be euthanized. And in the Netherlands, or the Holland, or whatever you want to call it, it is actually technically legal to euthanize babies with that degenerative disease because they're never going to come to full consciousness and things like that. Right? Or, no one should ever kill themselves. Well, what if you're going to have severe dementia or Alzheimer's, or you're dying of cancer that's going to be super, super duper painful, or you have Huntington's disease, where after about 35, you start deteriorating rapidly. You start getting aggressive, violent, sexually promiscuous, generally speaking. You start losing muscle control. Slowly your nervous system degrades, and then you basically can't walk, move, or talk anymore, and usually die within 10 years after you start degenerating. And a lot of people, once they start degenerating and there's no cure, there's no stopping it. And if your parents have it, you have a 50% chance of having it. So the question is, again, would it be reasonable for you to have yourself euthanized or euthanize somebody who was requesting it, if that was the case? In places like Oregon, they have the Death with Dignity Act, and Montana and a couple of other states where you can actually do this, but not everywhere, because some places think that life is sacred and should never be violated. Dogmatically, they believe that. Dogmatically, they believe that baby should never be killed. Dogmatically, these sort of things, or whatever. But the equipollence here is at least a reasonable counterpoint here as to why we might say perhaps it's not a dogmatic belief that all babies should never be, euthanized or killed. Maybe a little bit, possibly. Okay. Maybe you're like, well, it's apparent the grass is green, but on the other point, it's only apparent to you or us or to particular people based on their constitutive vision or something like that, right? So again, it's a reasonable counterpoint to say maybe the grass isn't necessarily green. Or you say, like, well, I'm Hispanic, I know that for a fact, or something like that. It's apparent. Well, it may not even be apparent that I'm Hispanic. It's not apparent exactly what I am to at least most people. That just happens to be the case. I get asked that a lot. What are you, or where are you from? And where are you from? I usually try to make them get to the question of ethnicity, because they want to know what countries my progenitors came from, not where I'm actually from, which is Buffalo, Mississippi, Atlanta, New York City, Tampa, for the last more than a decade. So at any rate, equipollence doesn't have to be a slam dunk counter argument where you prove them wrong or disprove what they've said. It just has to be a reasonable argument to so that you should suspend your judgment, and then you reach the suspension of judgment is aporia, and then you can reach a calmness or tranquility of soul that at least that you're not making a claim that you don't know whether or not it's true or not, because that could cause some level of disturbedness. Or if you are wrong about this, that can cause disturbedness or lack of tranquility or something like that as well. It's an interesting sort of ataraxia. Or if you, when we did, well, let's just think about it like this. Aristotle says that, it's always a free action, that if you do something, even if you're under duress from the despot or the tyrant, he says if the tyrant tells you to kill somebody or he'll murder your whole family, Aristotle says that's still an action that you did out of your own volition, or intentionally. You weren't forced to do so. So you did it even knowingly. So that would make it a decision that you've actually made, some sort of volition, some sort of that you were responsible for that. Whereas if, somebody absolutely grabs your hand, takes it and stabs somebody with a knife like that, then you weren't responsible because your action was forced. Or he says if you act in ignorance, then it's also, not necessarily the case that you should be punished for it or praised for it or whatever, because you didn't know better. Not the universal, like you should know stealing is wrong, but if you didn't know you were stealing when you were stealing, then because you thought it was free, let's say, then that's acceptable. Or you shouldn't kill an innocent person, but if you thought that the gun had blanks in it and you shot them and it didn't have blanks in it, then again you'd be acting out of ignorance because you weren't trying to kill them, but you did. Right. Okay. His example was sparring with a cap on your spear and forgetting that the cap wasn't on or something like that. I don't know, but the blank gun sounds better. At any rate, again, give me any thought, any appearance, then I'll come up with some equivalents, right? Through just some sort of counterpoints. Then I'll have to suspend my judgment, reaching aporia, a perplexity, a stop in the movement. And then that will bring me to ataraxia. So in the earlier example that I was just saying, where if you kill the person, you've done something vicious or unvirtuous or unjust, right? For Aristotle, the skeptics are going to say, I could claim that I was forced to do that and that wasn't up to me and that I really had no choice. And I would say, like, I find that reasonable. Lots of students actually find that reasonable too. In fact, other things like even in the Euthyphro, right? Whether or not Euthyphro should be charging his father with murder here. That's an equivalence of sorts where we should suspend judgment, which, we might at the end there, and then feel tranquil about it. So whether it's good or bad, you're not going to know for sure. Inherently, we will not know in its essence if something is good or bad. We can never know that, probably. So we'll have to suspend judgment for now. And then at least you'll have the knowledge that you don't know if it was inherently bad and going to damn your soul or not. So therefore, you can feel at least a little less bad than the person who doesn't believe that. So, like, for instance, suffering is another good one. All suffering is bad, but haven't you learned something good from suffering before? Are the best people in the world the people who've never suffered, or the people who suffered the most or a lot? Or who are your heroes? Almost all of them have had great suffering, whether it's Jesus or Gilgamesh, or you could even go to your Marvel and DC heroes. Do you know what they mostly all have in common? The same number of dead parents. Spider-Man, dead parents, dead uncle. Superman, dead parents, dead planet. Batman, dead parents. Is Batman ever going to be Batman if he doesn't have dead parents? No. Iron Man, dead parents. We can keep going on and on and on. Thor, dead parents. We can keep going on and on and on about this forever, but everybody has pretty much dead parents. I think the Hulk's parents were super abusive, but lots of suffering. Martin Luther King suffered a lot. Jesus suffered a lot. I mean, they had a whole movie on that called The Passions. I don't recommend it. And there's just, suffering does create, in general, good authors and good poets. Per capita, Mississippi has more great artists and great poets than any other state in the country. They have less than 2 million people in the state now, and they've produced authors such as, Tennessee Williams and Mark Twain, and I'm even going to go ahead and say John Grisham, and there's just Eudora Welty. There's just a ton of really good writers that come from Mississippi, because the suffering breeds good art, I believe. When I was younger and a punk rocker and I lived in Mississippi, I would on constant occasions be threatened and was almost violently pulled from my car on 2 separate occasions, which is why I started carrying a mag light around in my glove compartment, because the big one, like the cops had, because it's actually a club, and regardless of what state you're in, you can have one of those and it not be illegal. And I have that in my glove compartment so that if somebody tries to grab me through the window and yank me out of my car, I can break their arm. But nonetheless, when I moved to New York City, people would part ways in the street for me, and they wouldn't look me in the eyes, and they just wouldn't bother to even talk to me or mess with me or anything like that. It was a lot easier to be a punk rocker in New York, and almost more of a fashion statement. And the punk rockers that I met there were much less hardcore than the ones I met in Mississippi, because in Mississippi, you had to pay for being alternative. You're either country or you were hip hop or R&B or whatever. And if you didn't pick one of those sides, you were just clumped into the alternative category of everybody else that was weird. Like, The people that they clumped me with were like the goth kids and the, alternative people or whatever, but and skaters and all that other stuff. I mean, not that those people were bad or anything like that, but again, if you were strange in Mississippi, you had to pay for it. It was a lot easier to conform. Nonetheless, I can't remember where I was going with this thing. Oh yeah. Tranquility of soul or equanimity, not knowing that you're wrong about something is not knowing that it's necessarily bad or good. Suffering, that's where I was going with this. Suffering might be good for you, actually. Bullying might be good. I'm partially the way I am because of my bullies. I thank them for that. I thank them for the fighting that I had to put up so that I knew that I could. And people stopped messing with me after that stuff too. It's not, I mean, I remember at one point I was on campus at USF and they had this bullying, thing to sign, anti-bullying thing to sign. And I said, no, I'm not going to sign that. I think that some bullying is okay because it builds your character. And they were like, what? You're not going to sign this? And then they started bullying me. And I said, do you understand how ironic it is that you're bullying me to sign the anti-bullying petition and this big old poster and stuff? It's laughable. But no, I mean, suffering may not always be bad. I mean, sometimes we can show that a lot of suffering can be very bad for a person too, which again brings us to the equivalence, right? Like people that suffered in prison usually have worse lives thereafter, or notably about 80% of people in prison claim, like I got the statistic from one of my friends who did a lot of work on prison stuff and free will, that 80% of the people in prison claim that they were unwanted, or unwanted pregnancies and things like that, and that they had upbringings of suffering and perhaps beatings and stuff like that. And this is something that carries on through generations. But then again, the best people also come out of this too. So is suffering bad? Is suffering good? I can give an argument either way. So I'm going to suspend judgment and know that, maybe suffering could be either or both. So at least I'll be tranquil about whether or not my suffering is inherently bad, like absolutely bad, or if my suffering could lead to something better for me, right? Because that's the thing that ataraxia can provide for you. That small modicum of happiness or tranquility over, is the suffering I'm going through right now actually bad in its totality, or does it just appear bad now, right? Or I mean, a lot of times you have the joke, tragedy plus time equals comedy, because a lot of times, the things that are most serious are the things that we might laugh about the most later. Something horrible that happened to you that was super embarrassing at the time later on becomes good fodder for a story at a dinner party or something like that, right? Or maybe not. You never know. Again, whether suffering in the moment is good or bad is not something that we can generally make a judgment on. So as a result, we can reach some sort of ataraxia with whatever suffering we're going through in life. Does that make sense? It's not inherently the case that it is that way. It just appears that way to you at the time. And that is the thing with the skeptics, is that appearances are what we're really going with here, not what something actually is. All right. Okay, so let's see this here on page 6 when he says, do skeptics hold beliefs? This is very important. Under 7 in the Roman numerals, section 13 underneath that, again, page 6. When we say the skeptics do not hold beliefs, we do not take belief in the sense in which some say quiet generally, that belief acquiescing in something, quite generally, that belief is acquiescing in something. For skeptics, assent to the feelings forced upon them by appearances. For instance, me or this marker, if you have your eyes open, it's forced upon you. You can't by will alone make the marker disappear or me disappear. I mean, you can turn off the monitor, you can close your eyes, you can plug your ears, but the appearances are forced upon you as soon as you open your eyes or your ears, right? For example, they would not say when it is heated or chilled, when they are heated or chilled, I think I am not heated or chilled. Rather, we say we do not hold beliefs in the sense in which we say something, say that the belief is assent to some unclear object of investigation in the sciences. For purists, do not assent to anything unclear. So, for instance, if I feel cold, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is cold, because I can be running a fever and feel cold, right? Or I could put my hand in ice cold water and then stick it in like lukewarm water or room temperature water, and it'll feel like it's on fire, right? It'll feel hot. So it appears hot, and I wouldn't claim that it doesn't feel that way. Or even when you get really bad frostbite, it'll feel hot almost, right? Burning your skin. But again, this is a matter of appearances. Or if you've been in a house with a significant other or roommates and there's a thermostat in there, some people feel hot or cold at very different temperatures, right? It's not apparent. I mean, it's apparent to you what is hot or cold, but it's not necessarily the case for that for others. I mean, penguins start sweating when it gets to be like, 20 degrees outside or something like that. They need it to be cold. So we're not claiming that appearances aren't the case because they're forced on us. What we're claiming is whether or not we're going to assent to it dogmatically, not even in uttering skeptic phrases about unclear matters such as in no way more or I determine nothing, or one of those other phrases we shall later discuss, do they hold beliefs? Or if you hold beliefs, then you posit as real, and I mean really real, the things you are said to hold beliefs about. But skeptics posit these phrases not as necessarily being real, for they suppose the phrase everything is false says that it too, along with everything, is false, and similarly, nothing is true. So the idea is the sentence everything is false is a paradox. So if you say everything is false, then if that is true, then that sentence is true, which makes not everything false. But if everything is not false, then the sentence is untrue, and thus, again, a paradox. There's some interesting stuff that we figured out in the 20th century to fix this using some meta logic and what they call object languages and meta languages, but coming from a guy named Alfred Tarski. But that's not necessarily important. This is a liar's paradox also, by the way. First, I think, uttered in this way, all Cretans are liars and I am a Cretan, like a Crete person, or I'm a liar. Okay, I always lie, right? If I always lie, then that can't be true, or else I'm not always lying. Does that make sense? I always like the phrase, I think it's from a Nirvana song, I'm a liar and a thief. Well, then, are you actually a thief? Because if you're a liar, then that might not be true, right? Okay. At any rate, so let's carry on. Thus, if people hold beliefs that posit as real things they hold beliefs about, while skeptics utter their own phrases in such ways, a way that they are implicitly canceled by themselves. So the things they utter are canceling themselves, kind of like that everything is false claim. They're not, it's just trying to null it out. But the main point is this: in uttering these phrases, they say what is apparent to themselves, and they report in their own feelings what holding opinions affirming nothing to external objects. All right. So number 9, do skeptics study natural sciences? The answer to this question is yes. They study sciences in order to make assertions. This is on top of page 8. Assertions with firm conviction about any matters on specific sciences held. But we do touch on natural science in order to be able to oppose every account and equal account, and for the sake of tranquility. Because again, as the Epicurean said, knowing more about science makes it more likely that you don't believe that Poseidon is shaking the earth and making an earthquake or a tidal wave, or that the gods are pissed off and that's why there's a famine or a flood or, a windstorm or something like that. This is also the spirit in which we approach logical and ethical parts of what they call philosophy. So I would like to say that I'm generally a skeptic of this variety. I'm always searching for the truth. No truth have we found yet, but we're still looking. And that's why I learn a lot of stuff about a lot of different things. I know a lot about anthropology, history, math, science of all sorts, physics, and I also know stuff about observational science of creationists, string theory, and other stuff that's a little bit more dubious, dark matter, dark energy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I know about, random occult stuff, things about astrology, just so I can argue about it. I mean, again, studying the sciences and studying what we think we know is a good way of being able to argue about it. And it's also just, a good way of understanding the world, since you are, in fact, as a skeptic of the Pyrrhonian variety, the Pyrrhonian skeptic is actually looking for truth. This is not some sort of ruse where we're just going, there's not actually any truth. No, we're really looking for it. I mean, that's the point. We're searching and seeking and investigating as much as we can to find the truth, whatever that may be. We're unsure because we haven't found any yet, but we're not going to go back to this. We're not going to claim that it's confess of the inapprehensibility of all truth and just go straight with Socrates and say, well, there just isn't any to be had. That's an easy way out. It's a cop out. And it's also to make that claim that that no one can have any knowledge, and we don't even know that. Right? That's the other thing. We don't know that that's true because we haven't searched through all the truth, right? That's an axiom that we're getting here with the with the inapprehensibility. That's an axiom that the only thing we can know is know nothing. First principle, right? Okay, so do skeptics reject what is apparent? This is page 8. This is very important because people always mess this up. Those who say skeptics reject what is apparent have not, I think, listened to what we say. So no, they don't reject what is apparent. As we said before, we do not overturn anything which leads us, without our willing it, to assent in accordance with passive appearances. So, the passive appearance of particular colors, like this is black, this is black. You can't even tell what color this is, I think, in here because of the chiaroscuro that's going on with the lighting. But I mean, obviously you intuit that it's blue based on my sleeves. Nonetheless, it's actually black in the shadow, right? That's apparent to you as well. So passive appearances, or what, without our will, shows up for us. When we investigate whether existing things are such as they apparent, we grant that they appear, and what we investigate is not what is apparent, but what is said about what is apparent. So I had a student once and he said, I am black. And I was like, well, that's apparent, but what we're asking is what is said about that. And this is different from investigating what is apparent itself. Right? For example, it appears that honey sweetens. We can see this in as much as we are sweetened in a perpetual way. But whether, as far as the argument goes, it is actually sweet is something we investigate. And this is not what is apparent, but something said about what is apparent, right? If you get sick, also notably, sweet things might taste sour. Whenever you eat something that stays in your mouth, in a lot of ways, it can change the way that other things taste. I mean, honestly, this is one of the reasons why, let's say, like champagne and strawberries, or chocolate and red wine go really well together, is because the two things pair off of each other in a particular way. It's not apparent that it tastes one way or the other until they're paired together. And if we do propound arguments directly against what is apparent, it is not because we reject what is apparent. So, the sky is blue at the moment, that we set them out, but rather to display the rashness of the dogmatists, people who believe it absolutely. For if reasoning is such a deceiver that it all but snatches even what is apparent from under our eyes, surely we should keep on it in unclear matters to avoid being led to rashness and following it. So skip over to the next page, down to section 23, about halfway down. He says, thus, attending to what is apparent, we live in accordance with everyday observances without holding opinions. For we are not to be utterly inactive. So you can't, if you don't believe in anything, what are you going to do? Why move? Why bother doing anything at all? So since we can't be totally inactive, we got to go with the appearances of things. These everyday observances seem to be fourfold. Constant guidance by nature. So, necessitation of feeling, the handing down of laws and customs, and the teaching of kinds of expertise. By nature's guidance, we are naturally capable of perceiving and thinking. Okay, so, we can, natural guidance is the sort of thing that, we see, we think, we touch, we feel. That's just what's going on. Then by necessitation of feeling, hunger conducts us to food, thirst to drink. I think that that's pretty apparent. By handing down of laws and customs, we accept from the everyday point of view that piety is good and impiety is bad. We, by teaching of kinds of expertise, we are not inactive in those that we accept. And we say this without holding any opinion. So like, again, I'm not going to claim you don't know how to play the oboe if you know how to play the oboe, or you don't know how to ride a bike if you can ride a bike, or build a barrel or whatever. But, you know, that just seems apparent. So your expertise is apparent, but, you know, I just can't deny that. It just seems to be the case in its appearance. So that's the thing. We can be guided by appearances, but we can't believe them fully. And laws and customs too, I mean, they change all the time, but, you know, generally speaking, every religion has the same 5 or 6 I will nots, you know, don't kill people, don't steal shit, you know, respect your parents, worship whatever God we're pretending to worship at the moment here, or whatever God we believe in for this religion, dogmatically speaking. You know, there's generally some sort of prayer stuff, you know, don't kill people, whatever. It's, you know, it's the same sort of stuff that's always don't cheat, don't lie, you know, same sort of stuff. That's always the case for almost every major world religion. But at any rate, virtue, let's say, is another one that they say is good. This is from your actual other reading as well. He says it appears that virtue is good, and it appears that the best way to practice it is to follow Aristotle's mean, or golden mean. Now, why is that the case? Why should we follow the golden mean of Aristotle for virtue? Well, the reason for this is very interesting. Okay. Okay, so the reason for this is such: if we have our virtue here, that's the mean. Right, let's say courage. And then we got our vices, right, of deficiency and excess. Okay, and that's cowardice, of course. And rash. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about this. Why are we picking the middle ground for the skeptics, aside from the apparentness of virtue as a mean being good? Okay. Well, let's say that you are a Viking, and that if you want to die and go to Valhalla, the best possible heaven there is, you have to die in combat or battle. So if you don't die in battle, you are not going to go to Valhalla. So as a result, you know, they have a die with your boots on sort of, you know, strategy, never retreat, never surrender. Spartans, pretty much similar. So we can say that they're rash, or as Aristotle says, the Celts are rash down to a man. They can't even hold virtue because they don't fear death, right? So everyone is rash. Now, if it's the case that being rash is actually the virtue, because we're not sure, it could be the case that that is the correct way to live, that you should be without fear of death. You should be rash and heroic in all cases, in the sense that you even if it's going to kill you or it's stupid, you do the thing that you think is heroic. Or alternatively, we could go with cowardice here, right? So there are these free runners of southern Mexico that are indigenous people, and they've never really mixed with any of the Spaniards, and they are a tribe of people. They have really kind of interesting shoes, and they run up and down the sides of mountains pretty much here, and their policy in general, dogmatically, is you run away from strangers and you do not interact with other tribes or other people. They just keep to themselves in the mountains and do their own thing. And as a result, they're one of the only untainted tribes by European colonialism, because they just ran away. So perhaps cowardice in this case is actually the virtue, that perhaps they should have run away from the Europeans instead of inviting them over for dinner and trying to be kind to strangers who showed up from across the sea, that then raped, looted, and pillaged and took over their whole country and colonialized everything. So perhaps maybe they were correct in saying that cowardice was the right call and the virtuous call rather than the vicious one. So maybe that's the more apparent thing. Now we've reached the equivalent, so I can't say whether or not the Viking way or these free runners from Mexico is the way. But what I can say with some assurance is this: if it happens to be the case that the Vikings are right, then these guys are super wrong. Like they're as wrong as you could possibly be. But if it happens that these free runners of Mexico, that are the indigenous folks, are actually correct, then the Vikings are as far away from the truth as you could possibly be as well. So if you pick the middle ground here, courage, the mean between two vices, then what you've done is you can only ever be, how far into the woods can you walk? Halfway, then you're walking out of the woods, right? So the deal is, if you take the middle ground, then you can only ever be half wrong at worst, right? At best, you're on the mark. And virtue is actually just the mean, like Aristotle says. And it seems apparent that it's the mean. I mean, that's what the Greeks thought, moderation in the mean and all that. So that seems apparent. But even if it's not the case, even if it is not absolutely true, or that opinion is false, then you are only at least half wrong, right? Now, again, this ataraxia, it comes from knowing that, at least here, for instance, you're only going to be half wrong in any case, and you don't know whether or not virtue is necessarily good or bad. So even if you decide to be rash at some point or cowardly at some point, there's no way of telling inherently that it is actually this way, or for real this way, in reality this way, rather than just apparently good or bad, right? And given the length of time, it might actually be good to have been cowardly for survival, or rash, also possibly for survival or for defeating one's enemy or whatever, or saving somebody or something like that. But at any rate, that's kind of the whole bag that they have going on here. This formula isn't like a direct formula. It's something that sort of comes out of sort of like, I don't know. Again, it's more like an expertise. And he says in this reading here that it was like when a painter was trying to paint the froth on the horse's mouth when it was running in a race. And he couldn't get it right. And he kept dabbing it down with a sponge over and over again, wiping off the paint, trying to get that foam just right. And upon giving up, he threw the sponge at the painting, and it hit the painting, and it made the perfect froth on the horse's mouth. And he says that's sort of what ataraxia is like. When you suspend judgment, when you finally give up on it, there can be this overwhelming feeling of tranquility, equanimity, calmness of soul, or undisturbedness, and knowing that nothing you do or say or see is necessarily good or bad or right or wrong. So at least in that small sense, even if it appears bad, or if it appears good, or it appears something like that, at least you can have the tranquility of knowing it's not necessarily 100% that way, or the way. All right. Okay, so that'll be all for this video. And again, Pyrrho is the founder of Pyrrhonian skepticism. Sextus is, the main jam who wrote the outlines of Pyrrhonian skepticism. And the academy, Plato's academy, gets turned into academic skepticism, which claims that everything is inapprehensible, nothing can be discovered, and that we only know that we know nothing. And that is all. All right. Have a good one.